What up, y'all? This is your Don Israel coming to you live from Lit, asking y'all to subscribe to the channel. So make sure y'all subscribed, make sure y'all liking the videos, make sure y'all commenting, and make sure you turn on your notifications that let you know when new videos are dropping. We're dropping them daily, and you want to be on it because we on it, all right? So keep it lit, keep it locked, subscribe, we out. Marduce is a drink. What's going on, y'all? This is another episode of Lit, the premier platform for all things literary, swaggy, and otherwise. I am your guest host. I'm the host. What am I talking about? I'm the host, your Don Israel, aka Liddy Fontaine. Pretty Liddy is what they call me. And today's guest that we have here with us is the novelist Jessie Chaffee, here with her debut novel, Florence and Ecstasy. And she's going to be talking to us about the book, about women writers, and about the interiority of women, and whatever else comes up. And she's going to drink some of this Marduce. But before we get into that, we got to talk about this lovely dress. So one, thank you for coming.
Thank you
Appreciate
for having
you for
me,
having us.
John.
Thank
so
you.
happy to be on the
and
show.
then walk us through the outfit.
All right.
Okay.
So, should I stand?
Yeah, we. I love how we just
All right.
do
So
that.
this dress is by a Spanish designer.
Okay.
Called Rhys Mendian.
Okay.
And yeah, I like it because it's nice and cool. It's kind of open in the back, which is intentional.
Okay.
You get some air through the dress, but anyway, it's good for the
ventilation.
summer. Yep.
You got some ventilation in the toes going with these blue suede shoes.
These are blue suede shoes.
Uh-huh.
They're by Arch, and they're super comfortable.
Yeah.
Which I'm into. And then I got some jewelry along.
So you got some bling.
This is designed by my friend Beth Mockery.
Yeah.
And it's my initials. They're called hidden message necklaces. So the letters run all the way up to the top. And Beth was a structural engineer.
Yeah.
Became a jewelry designer and brought all those skills to her jewelry. So,
she brought some blingage, she brought some swaggage, and she brought some literary stuff all to chop it up with. So let's start the episode by having some Marduce. In past episodes, what I've been doing is drinking it at the end, but I'm like, man, let's start it off that way. So the Marduce, apple juice, Douce mix, Martinelli's, Douce, it's a portmanteau. I don't know if I'm saying the word right. It's like a mix of two words. Portmanteau, I don't know.
Yeah.
So basically, just pop this open. People don't know, if you didn't hear the snap, the pop is because we was drinking earlier. So we're doing it again I'm let you know I was drinking earlier. So we're just gonna pour a little bit more in the top. I am all over the place today. You just swirl it around. Whew. Everything's falling apart today. But it's still lit. All right, so boom.
Cheers.
Thank you for being on the show.
Thanks, you, Don. Awesome.
Okay,
it's delicious.
Cool. Yes. Thank you for that. It's the gin and juice of the literary world. Yes. So, talk to me, give me some background, and I'm going to refer to you in third person. It's going to be really weird for a minute. But, Jessie Chaffee, the background. Where'd you grow up? How did everything start?
Sure.
Okay.
I grew up in New York.
Okay.
I grew up in Greenwich Village, where I still live.
Okay.
It was a different place then, in the 70s and 80s.
Yeah, 70s.
Yeah. But yeah, I grew up on Christopher Street and then Far West Village.
Okay.
And grew up always loving reading and writing.
Okay.
And I think, like, as a kid, reading was always how I sort of understood the world and figured out my place in it.
Okay.
I loved reading mysteries when I was a kid. That was kind of what got me hooked.
The Encyclopedia Brown,
Harriet the Spy,
yeah.
Nancy Drews. All of those.
And it's something I wanted to ask you earlier. What is it about mystery? What was it about mystery that you loved so much?
You know, it's funny because, like, the books that I write most of my writing isn't mysteries, but I still am drawn to that in entertainment too, like TV shows and stuff. And I think it's because, when I was a kid, it was because you had these kids who could sort of figure things out.
Okay.
You know? So the mystery obviously drags you along, but then you had these kid protagonists sort of existing in the adult world, but who were the ones who could figure stuff out. Yeah. And so that was really cool. That was cool to me. Yeah. And then I think, on the larger level, like, as writers, we're trying to figure out the world, right? There's some some mystery solving. That's a part of the process.
And bring language to it, right?
Yep.
I think it's one thing to have this visceral sense of something happening, but to be able to make that visceral sense something, I guess, real for someone else.
Yeah.
Right? Like that's like that's the touchstone of philosophy, right? Like perception and how do you make something that's real for you, real for someone else. And I know your father taught philosophy.
Yeah, my father was a philosopher. He teaches philosophy at LaGuardia Community College in
Is he
Queens.
still teaching currently?
He's still teaching.
How does a man sustain that much philosophy for that? Well, I mean, that's you can get lost and get lost.
He loves it because you're just having awesome conversations with people all the time. He loves the students, so he runs the philosophy department there.
Oh, he runs? Okay.
He does. Yeah, he built the program.
He's the top. He's the top philosopher. And then your mother is a literary agent.
She is.
Okay.
Yeah.
Has she any notable representation?
Yeah, she represents. So back when I was a kid, she represented a lot of nonfiction writers. So she represented the person who wrote Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain.
Okay.
She represented the person who wrote the G-Spot. She represented a lot of.
Damn, who? We gotta get the Googles up. We gotta get the Googles up.
But she's
I'm about to Google it. Keep talking. I'm about to Google.
She's represented a lot of women who were writing about. So like in the 80s, she represented a woman who wrote a book called Swimming with the Sharks that was about women in the business world.
Okay.
And then when she became a mother herself, she represented a lot of books about raising children.
Is it noir? No. It's not erotic.
It's not erotic, no. Okay. But it is about a woman's like sexuality.
Well, we'll find it. Yeah. We'll find it. It'll come up. Hopefully, somebody do this in the comments and let us know what the book is. But keep going. I'm sorry.
But so I grew up around around books.
Okay.
And around people working with books.
Yeah.
And yeah, I always loved to read, but also because my mother's an agent, had a sense of what the business looked like, and then it's hard to make your
book come to life.
Exactly.
What, as you're growing up in 70s, 80s, this area, landscaping, what did that early landscape do for you, and how did that inform your person, like growing up? Because where you grew up, is it next to Stonewall?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's right along there. I actually lived for the first 7 years of my life right on Christopher Street.
Yeah. And so then this is, what year were you born? Not to get into
I was born in
business.
79.
So this is like also AIDS is happening at this time.
Yeah.
So what is it even like navigating that space at that time? Like, was this like, were your parents like sort of trying to find ways to hedge you from what was happening?
No, I mean it was a part of it was a part of the culture, and in a certain way, living in the village, it was a place that was, you had this horrible epidemic, and at the same time, you had all of these spaces and safe spaces and defining spaces for gay and queer culture.
Okay.
And so, so growing up, it felt like an incredibly vibrant space.
Okay.
And and an incredibly diverse space.
So finish.
Finish. No,
that's it.
That's it. Yeah,
Okay.
I mean, for a kid, it was amazing. There was a lot to take in all the time.
Trying to tame my excitement with the conversation, but when you said safe space, I want to get your understanding of a safe space, and I'm gonna give you my understanding. But I want to hear, like, when you say safe space, what do you think of when you describe a safe space?
I think of a space in which people feel safe to express themselves and act and exist in an authentic way.
Okay.
To use their language, to use their expression, to be who they are without having to mask that. Without,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I come to understand. So I've learned to create my definition, my working definition, because I think definition always changing based on what you have access to at the time. But my working definition comes from a resistance to the way I've seen the word safe space be used, especially in like universities and colleges. And I sort of see the safe space word being used as like an enabler for people of color, minorities, women, etc. In the way I've seen it, as a way to sort of further place a handicap on what is ultimately a dangerous life. And by that, what I mean is, like, for, being a student at Pace University, for example, I was the president of the Black Student Union, and they would talk about these safe spaces. Yeah. But what they were really talking about was removing what was actually, sort of removing the thing we actually needed to face in order to ultimately triumph whatever we were fighting. Sure. And so what I really understand safe spaces to be is somewhere where danger is something we're aware of. Yeah. But at the same time, it's something that, like, danger is not something that's eliminated from the conversation. It's something that we're constantly aware of lurks at the door. Yeah. But by the door, meaning it's on the other side, only meaning that if I'm in a space with you and we're having a conversation like this conversation now, I think it's a safe space insofar as how much are we willing to confront the dangers that comes from having a real conversation. Absolutely. And I feel like when you have a space that professes to be safe, people take that word safety for granted, and that means that all right, because this is safe, I don't have to do any of the dangerous work, right? Which is like interrogating the self, navigating the self. And I've always been like, coming up, like grew up in Bed-Stuy, pre-gentrification, and like where you live, or you still live around that area? I do, yeah. I live in the same complex of buildings that I grew up in. You got credit score might be a little good then if you could still live there now. Isn't that like, that's a nice piece of real estate? I live in West Village houses that was built as affordable housing, remained affordable. So it's this kind of I ain't trying to blow you up. But no, I say that to say that, like, growing up in Bed-Stuy, right? Pre-gentrification. And the thing that I hear a lot from some people, there's this sort of arrogant question, sort of like, oh, well, you don't like the fact Bed-Stuy is way safer than it was before like this happened. And I'm like, safety is that's a contingent for who? Like, because every neighborhood has its own dangers, right? Yeah. And I think one of the safest things about the dangers we navigated was, I think you learned that, at least to me, danger did not come without context. Yeah. That it wasn't just you were under an imminent threat all the time. And it's like, ironically, I feel more endangered in the neighborhood I live in now than the neighborhood that used to exist, simply because I don't know how to navigate the changes in the ways I used to. Like, I live in the same neighborhood and I walk down the block and like the same sort of things. Like before, I used to walk down the block and I would like fix myself in car mirrors. But now there's like a thing where like I'm very conscious of like, if I'm fixing myself in a car mirror, who's perceiving that as me trying to break into their car? Yeah. Right? And so it's all these things that I used to be able to do that I'm now hyper aware of because the people who live there change and the way my body is perceived in that space changed. Like when the neighborhood was dangerous, I was not perceived as a threat. Like, I'm a kid, like, oh, he's a nerd. Like, I was a kid who would like make jokes and like, play Game Boys and have Yu-Gi-Oh cards and stuff. So like everybody knew like, oh, he's not one of them. Like, leave him alone. But like against, an influx of people coming from like suburbias and like middle America, like, oh my God, like he's black, like you don't know what he's capable of. And it's just like, wow. So the reason why I say that, the idea of space is because going into this book, space is something that is very essential to the narrative. And what Hannah, who's the protagonist, starts off in Boston. She goes to Florence, Italy. The whole idea of how she navigates space and how she interacts with space is a lot about where she feels safe to interact. Like, she didn't feel safe to a certain extent in Boston. Yeah. And so she hightails it. Yeah. To Florence. So talk about like how space created this book. Sure. Yeah. So I guess to do that, if it's all right, I'll talk a little about Rhys. So I grew up reading and loving books and loving a lot of different kinds of books that were, I think in some ways actually the books I loved in high school were all about people who were outsiders who were trying to find their people and maybe trying to find those safe spaces. So I loved Go Tell It on the Mountain, James Baldwin. I loved Emily Bronte's Wuthering Heights, which in its own way is about kind of crazy outsiders who aren't able to find And like insider outsiders, right?
Yep.
Ironically, right? Like, yeah. Like there's an enemy amongst us.
Yes, exactly. And like Leslie Marmon Silko's Ceremony.
Okay.
Which is an amazing book.
Okay.
About Native Americans who fought in World War II and come back and are dealing with the experience of having been more American on the battlefield than they are when they come back to the States. And so I loved a lot of books about people who were trying to find those spaces. But it was only when I got to graduate school that, a friend handed me this book, Good Morning Midnight by Jean Rhys.
Yeah.
That I really got a sense of how I wanted to write the book, kind of aesthetically. Like what, I'd always written and knew that I wanted to write. But in terms of what I wanted to say and how I wanted to say it, this book really changed that for me.
Okay.
So Jean Rhys she's best known for her book, The Wide Sargasso Sea, which was made into a film later, which is a retelling of Jane Eyre from the perspective of the woman in the attic, Mr. Rochester's wife.
Okay.
And so it kind of redefines, she's always known in Jane Eyre as kind of the mad woman in the attic. And Jean Rhys turns that on its head and is like, let's go spend some time with this woman and see what was really happening. But her earlier books are all about kind of women on the fringes who are outsiders in one way or another, who are struggling with their pasts or addiction or poverty. And this book, Good Morning Midnight, is about a woman who is a British woman in Paris who is sort of descending into alcoholism. And she never sort of announces that on the page, but you experience it. And so what blew my mind when I read this book was, she was writing about something that I hadn't experienced. It was a very different kind of person. And yet the way that she captures that altered state, I just felt it. Yeah. And I read the book in one sitting. Yeah. I went back and reread it just to try to figure out how is she doing this? How is she like collapsing that space? Between the reader and the protagonist.
Yeah, read something that I want to collapse some space.
All right. Sorry, I'm just gonna read.
No, you don't got probably. This is
all right.
I'm stream of consciousness conversation.
I'm gonna read two short things from here, and one is a quote that I used as the epigraph for my book. Okay. You imagine the carefully pruned, shaped thing that is presented to you as truth. That is just what it isn't. The truth is improbable. The truth is fantastic. It's in what you think is a distorting mirror that you see the truth. Yeah. So I loved that because I think as writers, we're always trying to get at truth. Yeah. But a lot of the truth comes through distortions, right? When you're experiencing something, either in an altered state as yourself or as somebody else, there's a, sort of your sense of what that might look like is often upended. Yeah. And I'll read one other short thing, because this is where I think you sort of get a sense of how interior it is and how she's collapsing time and so on. I unroll the picture, and the man standing in the gutter playing his banjo stares at me. He is gentle, humble, resigned, mocking, a little mad. He stares at me. He is double-headed, double-faced. He is singing, "It has been," singing, "It will be," double-headed and with 4 arms. I stare back at him and think about being hungry, being cold, being hurt, being ridiculed, as if it were in another life than this. This damn room, it's saturated with the past. It's all the rooms I've ever slept in, all the streets I've ever walked in. Now the whole thing moves in an ordered, undulating procession past my eyes. Rooms, streets, streets, rooms. So that's just a sort of moment in the book where she's drunk and she's looking at this piece of art. And it, I think, tells you so much about what's happening outside, but also not, because it's kind of skewed, and so much about what's happening inside. Yeah, and I was thinking about that, like what you said about, like when you were describing Jean Rhys, and about this whole idea of like the sort of outside inside relationships. And I also think about space. I think the main real estate that we own, in theory, hopefully, ideally, is our bodies are our first sort of spaces. But oftentimes we don't think of our bodies as space that we occupy. And I think only now are we really talking about the body, like, with the introduction of like
feminist writers.
Yeah.
And especially with like in a more mainstream way, you have like somebody like Claudia Rankine.
Yeah.
Talking about like the body, like using that phrase, the body and the black body and the female body.
Yeah.
So let's take your body back a bit. So we go from mystery and we jump to Jean Rhys, but there's a lot in between.
Yeah.
So talk about how your body sort of changes and transforms over time in your relationship with like sort of literature. So you're reading. Yeah. So just give us like, so you're how old reading mystery, loving mystery? I'm in
and
not to say that ever stopped, right?
No.
Like,
but I'm in elementary and middle school.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then it matures. What's the arc like?
So the arc, I think, I go into high school. I'm reading like, like I said, Emily Bronte, James Baldwin.
Yeah, you're lucky. You got taught Baldwin.
Reading. I had great teachers.
I didn't get Baldwin at all. Ain't no Richard Wright. We got Tony, blew us out. We got that, but we didn't get much else. But keep going.
Yeah, so that a good amount of theater. I read Eugene O'Neill, Mitsuki Shangi, like just a lot of people dealing in a lot of different forms, but I think all dealing with, and this, I think speaks to some pretty great teachers too. All people dealing
really
with
got some,
trying
I'm listening,
to
I'm
find
like,
themselves.
Y'all getting like left the center, like y'all getting like the good shit. Like, yeah, that's dope. That's super dope.
Yeah, so I really, I loved all of that, but I read anything and everything that I could. I the only times I got in trouble when I was a kid were really for reading.
You were a kid, got in trouble for reading. Was it because of what you were reading, or like just?
No, just reading in school. Reading when I was supposed to be doing other stuff.
It's like, I'm gonna take this book out.
Yeah.
And so let me ask you, like socially, did that make you like a sort of outlier, in a sense? Because the irony about a book too is it's so interior, right? It requires you to be so insulated because you're in between the pages.
Yeah.
So were you still like, I think socially like?
I had good friends. Okay. I think it's, but I think I'm also an introvert, so I draw some energy from that time alone. And I think reading became that. So it was kind of an escape from the world a little bit. Yeah. But I had friends who were also somewhat introverts, who were, one of my closest friends was and still is an artist.
Okay.
And
what type of artist?
Visual artist. She's a painter. But we collaborated. We made comics together in middle school.
That's
so that was one of my
dope.
earliest creative endeavors. And they were about us. They were like starring us, but like alternate versions of us. So I had friends who would do that
Jessie
stuff
Chaffee
too.
It's like those TV shows where it's like it's you, but then it's like your name is changed, but like everything else is your last name is like different, but your first name and everything else is like completely identical.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, but but we got to create kind of an alternative world. Okay. So I did some world building in that way too. But I think books were always a refuge. And the real difference in finding Jean Rhys and then some other writers like her was all of a sudden feeling like maybe for the first time this is something that I felt in a way that's so deep and so visceral. And it just felt like it reached out and grabbed me. Yeah. And it was like, this is what it is.
I've heard that line of like books as a sense of refuge, and I can say that I came in through books differently. I use books as a sense of confrontation.
Really?
Yeah, but that's also because I didn't grow up reading. Like, I was like one of those kids who got in trouble for playing Game Boys and stealing Game Boys. And like one time I stole a friend's Game Boy to help him look for it. I was trifling as a kid. But my escape for me was video games and television. That was my escape. I read a book when I was confronting something. Yeah. Because what I understood, which is why I didn't like to do it when I was young, was that books required a lot of thinking. Like a game did not, it was like a sort of muscle memory. Like you fell into it. It was like, it's like a bad relationship with good sex. Like video games and television. It was like, you did it because it was there and it was convenient. It was like eating fast food. It was like you didn't have to do much to get pleasure out of it. But books was like a new relationship. And you were not going to have sex with it.
Well, maybe that's, what I love about books like this actually is that they require so much on the part of the reader.
Yes.
Like, they require so much buy-in that like...
And that's what I mean was like reading was something that was very mature. It was like if you wanted a mature relationship, you were a reader. That's my analogy for it.
Yeah.
Like I just made that up just now. And like I'm saying it, you know, and I'm pretty sure you say this too, as you're talking and you're describing something, like, oh shit, this is like I'm actually on to something with what I'm describing. And so when I say that, what I mean is that my entrance was the hard way in. Mm-hmm. Meaning by the time I had literature I really made its mark was through a teacher. His name was Longo Stevens. Yeah. And it was less of what he was teaching, it was what he expected us to get from it. Yeah. And what he expected from us to get from it is only what we were willing to get out of it. Yeah. This was like one of the first teachers in which we were not being graded based on how well we could just give him what was in the book. We were being challenged to really grapple with what was in the book. And I was like, the fuck? Like, he was really educating us. Like, I think for a long time in my education, we were getting instruction. Yeah. We were being instructed what to do. But he was like, no, you're going to be your own eyes and ears. Yeah. And I'm not even going to tell you if you're lost or not. Like, you know, so you're talking and he's just like, uh-huh. And you're like, am I lost? And he's like, well, are you? Like, this is your thing. And I was like, oh, shit. So then I would have to go back and read now. I'm like, damn. Like, I remember catching the rye. This was the first time. Like, I was in AP English, 11th grade, catching the rye. And the book, I was trying to cheat at first, you know, go on fucking Wikipedia when it first, this was like 2007. I'm a junior in high school. And like, Wikipedia had just hit the streets. So it was like all this information. But then I kind of sidetracked and started clicking all the links. And then I'm like learning about like Ronald Reagan getting shot. And like the guy who shot John Lennon had the book with him. And then, so I came back to school the next day with all this other shit. And he's like, yeah, that's all great, you done. So what about the book? And I'm like, oh shit, I didn't read the book. So then when I actually read the book, I was like, it started to like really create for me this place of questioning. Yeah. That when I was reading, what I always seen reading was like, this is a place for me to really interrogate not only the reader and the writer, but I'm the reader, but not only the characters and the situations, but it's like, well, how would I react in those situations? Yeah. So that's what I'm only saying that like to say like, I'm probably the only person I've heard describe reading as something not as like a refuge, but like a place of like, if I didn't want to hide anymore, I went to a book. Yeah. Because that was the place I was gearing up for some shit. If you saw me with a book in my hand, it's like he's probably got a debate or something he going to.
Yeah. It was social for you.
Yeah. It was
inevitably there was a conversation at the end of it in some way.
And so for me, it was like I only read books. Books weren't ends for me. Yeah. They were even now, like books, writing, literature is a means. Yeah. Right? Like even this conversation, like, you know, I read the book as a means to have the conversation and not the other way around. So I'm just always interested in like the ways in which books open up worlds. Yeah. Now, in the interview with Los Angeles Review of Books, you talked about women writers, sort of opening worlds of interiority. Mm-hmm. Explain to me when you describe interiority, what do you mean by that, and who are some of the women writers who did that for you? Sure. Yeah.
So I think besides Jean Rhys, other women writers I've looked to are Marguerite Duras, whose book The Lover is a slim book about growing. She was French but spent part of her childhood in Vietnam. Okay. And it's about sort of growing up as a woman, growing into her body, growing into being a writer, finding expression. But it's written in a pretty experimental way to try to bring in all of the sensations of all of those things. Mm-hmm. And it also really challenges how we remember and how we create our own narratives of the past. So it's doing a lot in a small amount of space. Yeah. Also, Claire Massoud, who we were talking about.
Super dope.
Amazing. And I was reading her book, The Woman Upstairs, while I was working on this book. Okay. And I think that book, it's a very interior book, and it's a book that's filled with rage. I mean, rage, I think, is repeated multiple times on the first page. Mm-hmm. And it's this woman who, from the outside, seems to be, she's a school teacher. She's done everything right in her life. And she hits this point in her life where she's really angry. Mm-hmm. And the kind of rage that infuses that book is incredible.
Yeah.
I was reading that, and I was reading Virginia Woolf as well.
Right.
And so all people who are trying to do on the page, trying to represent what happens to us emotionally, psychologically, what it feels like to be a mind in the world, to be a body in the world.
Right.
Elena Ferrante,
who's
who's best known for her sort of epic story of friendship, but she has three slimmer books that are earlier, one called Days of Abandonment.
Okay.
That's about a woman who, in the months after her husband leaves her.
Okay.
And it is so raw and feverish and claustrophobic and kind of filled with rage, and also these moments of mania and these moments where things become absurd. But you feel it all, and it's unrelenting, and also just there's no room for you as the reader to kind of escape it. Like you're in it. If we talk about commitment, if you commit to that book, like you're putting a lot into it. You're living it. So I think that's what I wanted to do in this book. I wanted to represent the kind of interior life of a woman who is at war with her body,
right.
Who is trying to figure out who she is, who has kind of found meaning in this addiction that was the eating disorder,
right.
but is trying to break free of that, and so has to find meaning somewhere else. And she's in this city, Florence, where she's an outsider, surrounded by beauty and food and art and life. So I was interested in how can I bring that kind of raw sense? How can I give somebody a sense of what it feels like to be a person in their body who's at war with their body, and make that relevant to anybody.
Yeah. One thing I would say, I think that I noticed about the book, and it's a very, how can I say, difficult thing it's an easy thing to fall into, a difficult thing to avoid.
Yeah.
Is that you made a book where someone leaves America and goes elsewhere to sort of quote unquote find themselves. Yeah. But you avoided that sort of no shots, that eat, pray, love narrative of that voyeuristic, like I went here and then I found that home was where it was I was always home, right? And I think that you gave the book, you gave Hannah's character this sense of dread that was ever present, and that the changing of landscape couldn't change. Yeah. And it reminds me of a Baldwin quote in Giovanni's Room, where he talks about that he realized in going to Paris that home was not a place but an irrevocable, am I saying that word correctly?
Yep.
Irrevocable condition. Yeah. And I really felt like that's where you sort of land, well, I understand that the body, Hannah's body, and she navigates dealing with the eating disorder and, against this vast history of Florence, food history, big buildings. She's small, she's emaciated, and you get to see that there is no real escape, which is, I think, the center of American fiction, the emotional logic that runs beneath the books that, in theory, we're told we should love. Less about the books we actually love are those books that allows some sort of escape from ourselves. Right. And you don't provide that escape.
No, it's true.
No, so how did you avoid that? How did you sidestep that boundary? Like, you're like, oh shit, was that something you even?
No, it's definitely something. I was definitely writing maybe, I guess, against a certain cliche. Yeah. And so I didn't want Florence to be a place where she goes and the place is the answer, or the people that she meets there are the answer. Like, she does get into a relationship, make friends, become involved in the life of the city, but the city is a complicating factor. It's like anything, because wherever you are, there you are, right?
Is that a John Lennon line?
It's somebody's line. I don't know if it's John Lennon. It's somebody's line. But she can't, she's trying to run away from herself, and of course she can't. And Florence is a place that is complicated. And so she's surrounded by all this art, all these kind of, depictions of women. And that's complicated too, right? A lot of them done by men. Like, you know, so she's also thinking about beauty and the idea of beauty and what that does. But anyway, I appreciate that you said that, because I want it to be a place that had its, you know, that Florence has its hard edges and it has its things that are imperfect. And so part of the book is about her relationship with the city, but it's not, I didn't want to romanticize that.
Yeah. And that was just me swatting the fly. This is the Lord of the Fly set here. The thing also that, you know, to me, novels have gotten easier for me to read when I stopped trying to lead it and allow myself to be led by them. Meaning, like, you know, you think you know better than the person writing the book of what should happen, as opposed to like, let me see where this person's going and let me sort of figure out. And that's why I said, like, you know, the fact that the book wasn't a book that I was expecting to read, like it really allowed for like, okay, like you're not creating this tourism guide, right? Yeah. Like, which is another, like a fiction within a fiction of fiction, is that place changes the person. And then you create, I think in very real ways, like this idea that, I'm going to go travel to this place and then I'm going to be cured of this. And you know, it's this whole exotification of the other, or the fetishizing of like the other, or whoever that is. But it's like, no, like what it is, like any real conclusion in this, like it's, and what I love is like the book doesn't even end on a conclusive thing. It's sort of like this is going to be going on even after the book ends. Yeah. Right. And I forgot who said this thing about novels, but the way like novels are like, they're not conclusive. Yeah. Right. And so they kind of give this sort of essayistic feel where it's an attempt at a life. I imagine like the world is an attempt at a world that you created. Yeah. Was that also something that you saw fiction doing, or what something that you wanted to do with fiction was attempting something that was not in itself the answer?
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, I knew I had something that I knew I wanted to talk about a woman dealing with her body, right, trying to find meaning in this moment of transition in this other place. And eventually, after I started the book and I realized kind of in the writing that the medieval and Renaissance mystical saints, so these Catholic women from the past, and I'm not Catholic by background, but I was...
Were you socialized Catholic?
I wasn't.
Okay.
I wasn't.
Okay.
Yeah, I didn't...
Because, you know, like, I was raised, like, Jewish Hebrew, but I was socialized Christian, meaning, like, Sundays was when everyone went to church. Like, I knew more about Christian holidays by virtue of all my friends, you know, sure, Christmas and Easter and all. So it's like, I respond more to Christian things than I do to, like, Jewish things. That's why I'm asking. That's so interesting. Because whatever you hang around and, like, socially, like, this culture is, no matter what it says, sure, it's Christian. Like, it's... No,
I guess I grew up around, I guess, in somewhat Christian environments. I went to, my high school was Quaker. It was a Friends school. Okay. But it wasn't, the teachers weren't Quaker, the students weren't Quaker. Yeah. But we did have these, you know, sort of meeting for worship that were basically silent meetings a couple times a week.
So I have a friend I think is Quaker. He said, like, basically when people have disagreements, y'all lock each other in a room and y'all can't leave till y'all agree or some shit. Is that true?
that makes sense to me. I mean, it really is. It's super egalitarian. Okay. And of course, these were like secular meetings. So like, meaning in an actual Quaker meeting for worship, people would stand up and talk about God. In our meetings, people stood up and talked about whatever they were dealing with as teenagers. It was this interesting space. But Catholicism really wasn't part of my growing up experience at all. And so when I was writing the book, and it's in this very Catholic country, and I was writing about some of the art, and I kind of ran into these women from the past, beginning with St. Catherine, and realized that they were important to the story that I was telling in the present. And so to get back to your question, I think, you know, I realized that I want to talk about women navigating their bodies, women's relationship with their bodies, and women over time, like trying to find spaces to express themselves. Right. And, you know, that isn't an argument that has has an answer.
Yeah.
So, and because I have somebody who's dealing with a kind of addiction, I also wanted to be realistic about the fact that, that we all have things that we carry, and they don't just get cured, right? They're a part of who we are.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to be honest about that too.
So excuse me, before I have you read something, the same way Jean Rhys and Claire Massoud, they gave you entrance into like a woman's narrative. One of the things that gave me access, and I've told you about this, and anyone who's watched this show, anybody knows me, I always talk about The Women by Hilton Als, and I had read it for you, but I'm gonna read it again. This last part of the book where he talks about like this whole idea of, and he's talking about Hilton Als, for anyone who doesn't know, is a black gay male writer. He writes for the New Yorker, just won a Pulitzer, super dope. But he talks about navigating his relationship with an older gay black man, and his sisters wanted him to leave the dude because in their mind he wasn't gay, he was another sister. And he was like, no, I'm actually a man who's gay. So like the way you would try to explain it out of your mind, I have to like put myself back in the frame of reference. But he says this thing that says the body alone does not make a woman, but a certain cast of mind does, and that cast of mind that creates disaster, even as it tries to withstand the disaster it has created. Yeah. And what I had seen, this book, which is also like, it opens up with, Hilton sort of, not even sort of, but actually realizing he didn't know who his mother was as a person until she died, and like looking at the person and going like, who is this? Not even just who is my mother, but who is this woman? Because I know the mother I had, and now that mother is dead, I'm left with this body that I have to like reckon with. Yeah. And that lack of reckoning in my own life with the women in my life, but also a certain level of interiority, because we're also taught, boys, boys don't cry. Boys don't have feelings. So any real inward look, men, I've not seen men really talk about that. And so it was something we talked about a bit earlier, but like rehashing the conversation, like my favorite male writers when it comes to interiority are like gay male writers. And I don't know if that's because it's a gender thing where like gay men are often not thought of as full men, and they're, often constructed as like women who are in males' body, like however it's constructed. But what I seldom see in heterosexual male writers is an interiority. Everything is exterior, right? And you read like Hemingway, and Hemingway is very like, part of one of the reasons why I think his writing style is so bare is also because it's like he doesn't like, he's not trying to reach for something beyond what he sees. Like, it's very like, this is what I see, this is what I'm writing. But to interrogate those sort of relationships between the external and the internal is something I seldom see heterosexual writers do of any race. Like, and so like the few people who I've seen do it, like I said, Baldwin, Hilton, Truman Capote. If I'm thinking, I would say like Phil Clyde has done it with redeployment in several instances.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Who else?
Who else? Garnet Cadigan.
Yeah, he does it.
I think in writing about being a body. In space, and thinking about different spaces too. And what that does. Yeah.
But it's seldom. It's something I seldom see in like heterosexual black male, or like not even just black male. I'm not going to pathologize. And just the heterosexual male, I think the narrative for heterosexual male bodies is that writing of the body is, what they call like within the women's lit. Like, that's being a girl. Like, stop talking about your body. Stop navel gazing. Stop. But it's like, but men can be like navel gazers of the mind. They can just talk about what they think all the time. Right. But like, how does anybody arrive at the thought? Yeah. And I feel like it's through this is how you learn about anything. It's through your body. You use her body as a way to sort of use her body as a site of interrogation. Yeah. Is this also like, how much of this is art imitating life? Of like this, like, were you informed to question by experience, or was this something that you tried out in the book?
Yeah. So I think it was both. So I
Okay.
think when I was reading Jean Rhys, when I was reading some of these other women, I knew I wanted to write something that was similarly interior and dealing with somebody who was dealing with a kind of loss of self or addiction or, and I wanted it to feel authentic. And so a thing that I did have to write about was I had dealt with an eating disorder when I was in my early 20s, and not to the extent that Hannah does.
Yeah.
But as I said to you earlier, what came out of that was a kind of what if, right? And I think a lot of fiction comes out of that. Like, we live in the world and we go certain directions, but what if? What about that other path? And so this book in part came out of that. Yeah. And, I was writing it years later, but I wanted to capture in adult fiction in a way that I hadn't seen captured at that point.
All right.
What I had experienced.
Okay.
So the sort of emotional, psychological experience that Hannah has comes from a place that's authentic.
Okay.
But her story is created. Okay. And I had spent time in Italy. I went back there and spent more time there. Got to know the city, got to know people, and so I wanted to make sure even though Hannah's an outsider, I wanted to make sure that in my depiction of Florence and Italian culture that I was getting as close as I could and not doing harm. And so I did research and all of that is real and is in the book. So the story's created.
Well, read some of it. Give us a taste of what we in for. So for the people who ain't read it, who gonna go get this book, you better go get this book.
Okay, so I'm going to read from the very opening, the prologue. This is where the book began when I first started it. This was the first thing I wrote. And it opens with Hannah in Florence in August, around this time of year, when it's hot as it is right now. And I think that's all you need to know.
Okay.
Prologue. This morning is every morning. I've been here almost a month, and still I wake too frequently, too early, to the buzz of mosquitoes, gray light, and the window shutters swinging open and closed. I wake from violent dreams filled with strong winds and slamming doors, bodies thrown against windows loose in their frames, frames loose in their sleeves. I wake in Florence, afraid. The shutters swing open, and each time I catch just a glimpse of the Palazzo Vecchio's tower against violet before they swing closed again. This image is familiar now. This empty apartment is mine. Still, this is not quite life. On this morning, I relight the citronella coil and walk to the window. In the alley, a man puts on a magenta helmet, climbs onto a moped, and pulls out onto Via Malinchini, the last to leave the bar below. Once he's gone, there are only the birds that shoot past my window like darts thrown screaming from an unseen hand. It is feeding time. I walk to the bathroom, pull my t-shirt up over my head, let my pants drop to the floor, and drag the orange scale away from the wall. It rattles across the blue tiles, catching in each valley. I adjust the needle to 0. Not cheating, never cheating. I watch the numbers spin like a slot machine until they stop, predictably. It's good, I say aloud, running my hand along my face, my arm, my stomach. It's good, I repeat, overly decisive and sober, trying to coax my reflection into agreement. Today, I think, as I dress, tie back my hair, and climb the 3 stone steps to the kitchen, will be different. I open the long slatted doors and step out onto the small balcony, which is so steeply pitched it feels like it may topple into the courtyard below. It is the end of August. For weeks, the other windows have been quiet and dark, except for the apartment across the way and 1 floor down, where an old woman sits all day, her arms spreading on the sill. She is sometimes staring out, sometimes cooking sauce I can smell as steam climbs out and over the terracotta roofs. But even her window is vacant this morning. The Italians have fled the cities for the coast, and all over Florence there are handwritten signs taped to shop doors. The type of scrawl that normally says, back in 5, only in this case it's back next month. The signs do not deter the tourists who fill the piazza around the Duomo, who line up at dawn to be the first into the Uffizi Gallery, who haggle and hassle at the Central Market, who shout at the buses that lumber down the narrow streets and heed no one, who walk the bridges with gelato dripping down their hands in the evenings and watch Italian bands playing the Beatles. A manic, frenzied movement repeated day after day, night after night. They are looking up, always up at the frescoed ceilings of churches, at the parade of Madonnas in museums, at the oversized head, hands, and feet of the David, at the performers dressed as mummies who move only at the sound of money in their jars, at the buildings edged in angels that circle and circle. I am no different. I still cannot cross Piazza della Signoria at night without looking up to the Golden Lion at the top of the Palazzo Vecchio, to the harsh glare of Neptune who rules the fountain outside, to the writhing sculptures in the loggia at the piazza's corner. Lit from below, the Sabine woman twists and twists out of the grasp of her attacker, all that stone tapering from the massive base to the single point of her finger reaching toward the sky. There is something more, it says.
Yeah, that's always something more. So where can people find Florence and Ecstasy?
You can find it in all bookstores.
Yeah.
You can find it online.
Okay.
Yep.
Make
Anywhere books are sold.
All right now.
Yep.
And people can follow you
at on Twitter and Instagram at Jessie L. Chaffee.
Okay.
My website, jessiechaffee.com.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
you can also find me over at wordswithoutborders.org.
Which is And then Words Without Borders is what?
So Words Without Borders is a website that publishes international literature and translation.
Okay.
So I work there as an editor.
Okay.
And it's all free. We publish work from around the world.
Dope. And they can follow Words Without Borders, that website?
Yep. Wordswithoutborders.org.
Okay, boom.
Yep.
Okay. So before you get out of here, two things. One, we want to get that literary swag of yours.
Yes.
So swaggy. So we got to know.
All right.
The writers.
So the writers, Rhys, Eleanor Ferrante,
okay,
and Claire Massoud.
That's super. I just love that. I love it. And she has a book coming out.
She has a book coming out, The Burning Girl, end of this month. It's going to be awesome. Yeah.
Right on. I'm hyped. I'm hyped.
Excited.
Then the swag.
The swag. All right. Tracy Rhys.
Okay.
Scotch and Soda.
Yeah.
And Beth Mockery, jewelry designer.
That super dope. Super dope. So we have a gift for you for being on Lit. This is, you open it. I'm about to open your gift.
Oh, this is sweet.
Yeah. And so under it, we have it signed so that you can, people know that it's yours.
That's
so
great.
You can't steal it.
Thank you, Don.
Yeah.
And
cool.
I have a present for you,
All right,
too.
coolin'. What you got? What we got?
So my publisher, the Unnamed Press, made this awesome tote bag for my book.
Hey, this is
featuring
super lit.
the sculpture from the book and a line from the book.
This too could be life. I like this line.
Thank you.
I like this line. I'm getting like Kanye West, like good music vibes from this. This is good. Relax and take notes while I get more literary totes. So this has been another episode of Lit. You can follow the boy at Yadon. You can follow the platform at Lit Platform. Shout out to Pink Pig Productions on the post-production. Shout out to Surreal Jules on the music that you hear so effortlessly playing under this episode. Shout us out. Make sure you get this book, Florence and Ecstasy. If you see Jessie, holla at her. Oh, you got some events coming up, right?
Oh, yeah, I do.
Yeah. Talk about the events.
In September, right around the Brooklyn Book Festival, I'm reading for the Guerrilla Lit reading series.
Okay.
September 12th. September 13th, I'm reading for the Long Island City reading series.
Okay.
Brooklyn Book Festival bookend event. And then September 14th, I'm moderating an awesome group of writers having a conversation for Words Without Borders.
Okay.
Chris Lee, Young Hakim, Salar Abdo.
Okay.
Great international writers.
All right. So you heard her. Make sure you're at these events. It's lit. We out. See you next time.